If you're new here, my name is Aaron Apter. I'm a professional musician living in Nashville, playing live, recording, touring, and I like to give other people an inside look at what it's like to live and work in Nashville, or what it's like to just start a music career over and climb up the ladder. And I kind of use myself as an example, but this channel really isn't about me. It's about all of you. And I like to present myself as somebody that everyone else could be. Because really, when I started playing just a few years ago, I took a big break, long time off. I basically started from scratch. And yeah, it's a lot of people say I feel like I'm too old or time has passed me by or I can't play because I have all these other things going, and that's only true if you want it to be. And I really like to use myself as an example and also share some of the lessons I've learned coming back to music a second time and some of the lessons I didn't get the first time around. And if you've watched this channel, you already know that gist. And I do this weekly live chat so I can answer questions, respond to comments. Because when I first started this channel, I had like 20, 30 viewers, maybe if that. And sometimes it still feels like that, but I'm about 1,500 right now. And I'm also having a lot of other things move around where I can't always answer all my emails, answer all my questions or my comments. So I really like to set up, like donate an hour of time each week to really just engage with people and talk with people. And so I'm here to answer questions. If there's a video you want to see about working, living in Nashville, about working as a professional musician, anything that really people don't talk about in the music business, I'm here for it. Because I think the music business is great to be in. It's great to be a musician and an entertainer, but it's horrible at training people on really how to function as adults in this business. Because really, when you're a musician, you're a business owner. You are working yourself as literally a business, and many of us don't have any business backgrounds because really business is the antithesis of art, and I've always thought that. And not really focusing on those things, saying I just want to play and I'm going to get discovered, that's all that matters. And I'm just a side musician, but I was thinking, okay, I'll just play and then sooner or later I'll pick up a gig with somebody big. And I found that doesn't really happen that way. And even when I do get those gigs, sometimes they're not forever. And so what do I do in between those gigs? And I really like to talk about that here because even in music school, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about ways to, build passive income, ways to sustain yourself outside of just playing, how to pace yourself. And they don't talk a lot about like the personal dynamics. Hey, Paul, thank you for joining us. Paul's often the live streams, and he's also often on my live gigs. That's also another thing I do with my channel. I really like to showcase live gigs, and I want to share this thought about when I'm streaming live gigs. A lot of times, I don't want to do it. I think people aren't interested in it. I think it's boring because I do it every day. And that's just my perspective because I'm there every day. But people who are watching from around the world, they find it fascinating and interesting and helpful because they don't do that every day, and that's not their world. And they are curious about what would it be like if I played and worked in Nashville. So sharing my experience, something that feels very ordinary to me, feels extraordinary to other people. And so that's why I encourage people to sometimes just put your stuff out there. And if you think it's bad or it's uninteresting, it may be, but you never know. Sometimes people might find it really interesting. But what do you have to lose by putting it out there? I think a lot of us are afraid of what other people are going to say or judge us, or if things aren't perfect. But I found that when I'm showcasing a honky-tonk gig and things are a lot of I'm playing songs I may not have heard before with people I've never heard. And that's a really important part of the process, knowing how to go into these situations and saying, all right, I don't know these songs, I don't know these people, how can I make it work? And people like seeing, can this person pull it off? It's almost like Evel Knievel. Like you used to tune into him, when people back in the day would tune into Evel Knievel and just see if he could pull off a stunt or if he would crash and burn. That's part of the fascination with it. Hey, Rhett, thank you so much. Rhett's been following for a minute, and Rhett's also, he's He's in Nashville as well, and I've run into him a few times. I'm really hoping to play with him soon, one day. But that's also a great thing about Nashville. You like can know these people and be friends with them, and have never played with them before, but you just see them in passing and you get to know each other. And hello, Daniel. Thank you for joining us. Oh, so John, oh, you're talking about John? Yeah, John Bollinger. Yes, he's a great guy. So if you know John Bollinger, he's over at Premier Guitar and he does Rig Rundown. Play some gigs with him. He's been on my channel a few times. He's a great player, great dude. And yes, Rhett, it will happen. We will play together soon. So yeah, what I want to like talk about is all the other things that people aren't talking about. And people that are in my position, oftentimes, and understandably so, they try to present themselves as this polished, this finished product, and you're essentially marketing yourself, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that can be a good thing. However, I think sometimes when we see everybody marketing themselves in this very curated, pristine way, it gives us this false impression of what it's like out there. And also, when we're trying to do what they're doing, and we may not feel like we're getting the results right away, many of us will feel like we're a failure, feel like we can't do it. Or we see this stuff online and it feels so freaking far away and so unattainable that we don't even try. I at least know I was that way. And a big part of my mission here is to really show people how the sausage is made, for lack of better terms. You know, seeing the ugly parts, the dirty parts, the hard parts where you have self-doubts, where you're exhausted, where there's some kind of conflict that you need to resolve. Because showcasing that stuff isn't very sexy, right? It's not, maybe if you want to be a train wreck, maybe if you want to like just people to tune in for drama, and I definitely don't want to do that. But I also definitely don't want to be super vanilla and being like everything is perfect and clean and easy. I really want to give people a real look at what it's like to come into this business, to work in this business, whether you're new, whether you're starting over again, or if you're new to town, or if you're thinking about making a move. Just give people some like real advice and a real look at what it is like and the personal journey along the way. And that's something I was really thinking about a lot this week. I probably had one of the, personally, probably the worst weeks of my life. Couple of like the worst days of my life, like where it was crushing. My whole world just felt like it fell out from beneath me. My whole vision of reality was totally altered. And yeah, and I was thinking, well, I don't want to hide this, right? Because this is part of the reality of working as a musician, of the journey. Because when you're a musician, that is so much your identity, and so much of what's inside here comes out in your music. But I also want to have boundaries, and I didn't want to be like that overly dramatic, overly sharing person. Because I really do think that social media should be business media, in the sense that if you're using this as a musician, you should think, all right, how am I promoting my business? What's my goal? What am I trying to do? What message am I trying to send? Now, if you're airing your dirty laundry on social media 24/7, I would say that's maybe that could be your brand and people know you for that. But is that going to make somebody want to hire you? Maybe that'll make someone pay attention, but do they want to hire you because of that? So I think about that and I'm like, I don't want to do that. But another part of my mission is being authentic and being real and showing people that I'm a real person and giving people permission to be real. So I like to share these things in kind of like doses. But even if we're thinking on a personal level, we all have friends that sometimes the world is ending for them. They feel bad for themselves. And you sympathize with them for a little while. But sooner or later, you're like, hey, okay, you got to get together, because feeling bad for yourself and just living in this grief, it's becoming your identity. And you don't want that to become your identity. But likewise, on the other side of the coin, you have people who go through some really intense, dramatic, life-altering changes. And they're just like, yeah, I'll be fine. I'm just going to keep moving. And they compartmentalize it. And then sooner or later, it just comes out in other ways. It manifests in some sort of destructive behavior, some sort of anger, misdirected. And like talking about just like emotional health, it seems like it's a very unprofessional thing, or at least that's what we're taught. And I really want to talk to people about giving them permission to say life is tough, giving them permission to express grief and express frustration and express fear, but also not have it define them. I think sometimes if you don't address those things, they end up driving you forward in the future. But if you address them too much or wallow in them, they define you in the present. So that's what I was kind of dealing with this week. And also was just, man, I was freaking exhausted. Like, I was playing on stage last night, and I was like, am I having a heart attack? Am I having like a panic attack? Because I like broke out in this really cold sweat, and I was just exhausted. And I was thinking, man, I might need to like bow out of this gig. But then on the set break, I was talking to other members of the band. They're like, oh yeah, the stage is crazy hot. And I'm like, oh, okay. I just thought it was just too hot for me. But yeah, that was also an indicator to me. Is like, okay, I'm getting like really exhausted, really tired. And I decided like, okay, I'm not going to take any gigs today because I just need a day off. And I was really looking forward to doing this live chat because so sometimes when things get a little bit rough, or not even rough, but just exhausting and tiring, I want to share that, even though like I'm pushed to my max, because I want to show people what that can be like and how to react to it. And sometimes I might make some poor decisions like, oh, I can do another gig. And sometimes you don't know you've pushed yourself beyond your capacity until you're there. And we all have different capacities, right? Like in Nashville, I see people posting, oh, I'm doing 16 hours of gigs today. This is my third day in a row doing this. And I'm like, how do these people continue functioning like this? It's really a sprint. Yeah, and so I'm just giving people just an insight on everything, and what I say, what works for me may not work for you as well. That's one last thing I want to really just talk about is everything is just like relative to your situation, right? So, quick anecdote, what really deterred my music career the first time was I got ran over by a truck, nearly lost my arm. I had to go through multiple surgeries, and I just went through all this hell, which basically took me out of music for 10 years. And even now, I kind of feel a little bit of, I would say, well, it's no longer shame, but I did feel shame that I was like, why am I so upset about this, grieving this? I didn't lose my arm. I rehabbed it. I got back to where I am. Just let it go, move on. And, but when I tell other people that story, they're like, oh, wow, that's crazy. But when I was in that story, I was like, listen, you're not paralyzed. You can still function. You may have just crushed yourself financially and mentally, but you're still alive. Deal with it, move on. And so I never dealt with that and never moved on. And that really just, because I was minimizing my suffering. And that really impacted me in an unhealthy, negative way. So if you go through something like you get fired from a gig, a job, don't minimize that suffering. If that bums you out, man, it bums you out. Think about it, put it out there, process it, and yeah, kind of move on. I think that when we do things like that, it's like hygiene, like brushing your teeth, taking a shower. Do you get super excited to do it every day? No, but it's part of your routine and what you do, and that's just part of being human. That's part of the process. Yeah, so I'm here today. I'm gonna answer some questions, talk about what's coming up, but really I'm here for everybody else. This isn't about me. Again, I use myself kind of like as a guinea pig for everybody else. Like, this is one thing that happens. I want to get to a few questions. So Dan says he changed his name on YouTube because Dan the drummer, but he changed it to something a little more professional sounding. Dan, I think it's whatever you're comfortable with. I think sometimes when you say like Dan the drummer, I remember that. I remember Dan the drummer from Utah. But that's just me, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do that. I'm just saying this coming from my perspective. And again, I'm just like you, I'm a drummer. And yeah, Joel, so Paul, what you were saying, yeah, playing 2 or 3 jobs, yeah, I can beat you up. And some people, they do that every day. And that doesn't make one of us better or worse than the other. Like, different people have different capacities and different people have different standards. So I work with people in Nashville who maybe will play one shift a week and they will try to make it their best shift ever. And they like are on top of it and it's cracking and it's really good. I also work with some really experienced musicians who like play 3 shifts a day regularly, and they find a way to just like kind of go on autopilot, or kind of like, let's call it running. They're frequently in a marathon and they pace themselves for a marathon, where it's like, okay, I'm going to go at an intentional pace and I'm not going to really overcook myself. And neither is right or wrong. It's like, what do you want to do? Where are things going? And one thing I've noticed about Broadway in Nashville in general is that it's exploding, right? So many more people coming in, so many more musicians coming in, real estate going up, lots of new honky tonks, lots of new venues opening up. It really is an exploding city. And if you're a musician, you can look at that in a few ways, and I've noticed people looking at that in a couple different ways. One of the things that I'm really seeing, though, I'm hearing from my peers, and I'm also experiencing it firsthand, is that if you're playing downtown on Broadway, the money is getting to be very different. Prices of drinks have gone up. Prices of parking has gone up. Food has gone up. People have less disposable income. They don't have stimulus money right now. And the base pay, kind of your bottom line pay from the venues, it hasn't changed, but people are tipping less. Also, there's a lot more venues now. There's a lot more stages. And so the product is becoming diluted in terms of there's more stages, more musicians. So I would say you're going to have all skills of musicians. So when you get more musicians coming, that means you get more good musicians, but you also get more bad musicians. And playing on Broadway, there are some amazing musicians, world class. There's also some incredibly mediocre musicians. And we like to say that those things sort themselves out, and for better or worse, they do. However, but the money is getting less and less, even for like the amazing musicians, because people want to go to all these different venues, and they have so many options to choose from. And people are tipping less, and there's less people there, and so a lot of musicians are kind of like bemoaning the progress coming in Nashville. And I understand where they're coming from with that, because I absolutely feel it as well. This year I'm playing more gigs and I'm making less total. And it's scary. And I'm really having to hustle here. Like, what I was getting paid for last year for like a gig that could pay me like $500 to $600, maybe it's like $300. For a gig that I would easily make $200, now it's like maybe like $125. And there's all this variance, but the economy is definitely changing down here. So musicians are I hear them kind of being upset, scared, or saying, this is BS. And a lot of people, a lot of belly aching, which is understandable, because we're out there playing our asses off every day. Nothing's changed, but the money has kind of changed, and musicians are getting less, and we're seeing the honky-tonks get more. And it's curious how the ire is more directed towards patrons, the customers coming in, who are, by tipping us, they're subsidizing the honky-tonk owners' payroll. But we're more upset with the customers than the honky-tonk owners, even though that business is exploding. And a lot of them are being run by corporations right now. And when corporations run things, you see a lot of times they come in and strip things down, extract as much money as possible from the operation, pay people as little money as possible to get the job done and to please the shareholders. And so we have some new corporate honky-tonks coming in. Like, everything is, I think most of the stuff is corporate downtown now. And rightfully so, musicians are scared about that. But I think that is really a metaphor for the music industry as a whole right now. In the sense that a couple of years ago, I was thinking things are going to change on Broadway because there's way too many people making a living down here and making money. And it didn't happen the way I thought it would, but yeah, people are making a little less money downtown in music right now. And I think that's the nature of this business, in the sense that in music, if you find something that's working for you today, tomorrow there's a good chance it may not work because the model has changed. And the business model of music is constantly changing and constantly evolving. And if you're out there trying to chase a trend, or you see something going on and then you get to that trend, by the time you get to that trend, most of the money's been tapped out of it and it's gone to something else. All right? And so that's where like the major players, like the corporations, the large businesses, the labels, they can come in and they are skilled and adept at this, and they are built to, okay, let's really make this thing more efficient financially, and let's work this system so we can get the money out of it. Whereas us as individual musicians, whether you're an artist or a side musician, you're thinking you are a swift fleet that you can pivot like that. And you can move on a dime, where corporations can't, because they have to do all these different things to stay in line and keep on the same page. Well, as musicians, let's start thinking. I'm personally thinking, what are ways I can pivot? What are ways I can diversify not only my income stream, but my opportunities? Like, am I focusing solely on Broadway? And if so, I'm at the whims of Broadway. So if I'm working with one band, let's say somebody on that band gets drunk and gets us fired, I might be out of 50% of my work just one day. Let's say one of the venues closes down, or let's say they say we want to go in a different musical direction. You could lose a huge portion of your income in one day. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because Broadway can be great for reliable money, for decent money, for livable money. But I think sooner or later it dries up, or it goes in different places. And I think that's, again, a metaphor for the music industry. So that's why I'm always thinking about what are some alternate things I can do to continue to build my profile, my brand, who I am as a musician, my opportunities outside of this bubble I'm in. So if I can have some kind of streams of passive income, like I'm selling something online that can be sold while I'm sleeping, it doesn't have to be a ton of money, but if I get a little money coming in from that, maybe work with some other artists, maybe original artists that maybe don't pay quite as well, but that's knowing someone, that's networking, maybe working in a corporate environment with a corporate band, which is not my ideal situation. But I did that yesterday, and again, that opens up a whole new world of opportunities for me. So I think about it like planting all these different seeds in these different areas. And also thinking about doing things like YouTube, starting to like sell things to my audience, or like give things of value to my audience, so that one day I can make more money off of this in case all the gigs in the world dry up. And I've been doing this for about a year yet, and I don't make money off of this. I've had some very, very generous viewers donate, which I thank you so much. And I've invested that in the channel. That really helps. But make no bones about it, I am not making money off of YouTube. I'm not planning on it. But I'm starting to build systems where maybe one day I can make money. And I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and I say I'm essentially like building a car right now. I'm building a vehicle. Say my other friends, they're out there running hard every day. Like they're running to Florida from here. And it feels like they got like weeks, months ahead of me. But if I spend that time building a car, and I'm seeing them go off ahead, but then all of a sudden I got that vehicle, and then boom, all of a sudden you see like it just, people will just slingshot because they spent their time intentionally building something that's going to get the job done. And that's what I really try to intentionally do with what I'm starting to do things online. I'm starting to have some other ideas about ways to work with artists. You know, I'm starting to write some music, because you know what? One of the things I'm going to do is all my original music, I'm going to put that as backgrounds in my videos, in my Instagrams, in my TikToks, whatever. Another notch in the belt that's like, okay, a little bit of money coming in. Is it going to be a lot? No. But if I build my audience, let's say I build an audience of 100,000 somewhere, and I start putting snippets of my original music in there, and there I get like double dip on the royalties, that's another avenue for money. And just thinking about all these different ways to kind of, I want to play, that's my primary goal, but what are some other things I could do? And I want to take a look at some of these questions here. Let's see. So, Rhett, thank you so much for, I really appreciate just talking about these, like other people listening saying, yeah, I get it. Because I'm just like you. A lot of these things I feel very vulnerable about, or I feel almost embarrassed. Like, am I sounding like that guy who talks too much about feelings or who's being a little bit too personal? And I think that is something really common with musicians. A lot of us have self-doubt and insecurity. And I think sometimes acknowledging that as well gives people permission to have that insecurity and not feel like they need to be perfect. Because I know having this appearance of needing to be perfect can be exhausting. It's like you're playing a part after a while. My buddy Joel in Arizona, I've met him. I met him at a gig a month or two ago, and he was coming through about a month ago in Tennessee, and I was sick and I couldn't meet him. But he's a guitarist, and we chat frequently. And he's talking about house flipping. Yeah, you got into a good time to buy, but at the same time I got out of it, and everyone's saying, yeah, everybody. So Joel makes a good point about he like got into the house flipping business, and think about it like musicians moving to Nashville. A lot of people think they can hit for a lick, meaning they can come in, make some quick, easy money, and then like get out. And I like to make an analogy kind of like there's a term they say in investing or in the stock market. You know, time invested beats timing every time. So sometimes people think, oh, if I just buy the stock at its lowest point and then right before it skyrockets, I could be a millionaire. Well, yeah, but if you do that, like how often does that happen? And when you're chasing that, you're often, by the time you get there, you made the wrong move. But if you constantly invest into solid things over time and are patient with it and not expecting these monumental gains, but just expecting consistent growth as you're consistently putting in, and then realizing that you're going to have some ups and downs, but overall, we need to be trending up in the big picture, but understanding that there's no quick, easy path for it. That would be really great. I think a lot of musicians should consider that. Remember, time in the job, in the market, in the business beats timing. So yeah, might get lucky, might be the right place at the right time, but how often does that happen? Let's see. Yeah, definitely have this shift in the model. Yeah, and Trey's joining us. Hey, Rhett, thanks for joining us. Trey's joining us from New York. Yeah, I think every scene is going to be a little bit different. I think sometimes people in New York or people in Nashville are like live in this Nashville bubble, just like people in New York and LA. And every city is going to do it a little bit differently. And I think sometimes you can learn a lot about what other cities are doing well and what you could be doing better. And yeah, I lived briefly in New York. I spent some time there, and it's a great city. I used to want to live in New York as a musician, and now it's like I don't think I could do it because I think the cost is so prohibitive. I'm wondering if Nashville is going to get to that soon. So Paul's asking, playing on Broadway, does anyone hit the big time, hit records? You know, I think there are some artists that have played on Broadway. But I'm trying to think, has anyone been discovered on Broadway? I really don't think so. And I can't speak from any authority. But you bring up a good point, Paul. And I think sometimes people forget this. That Broadway is very much, it's like a job. That's what it is. Like you show up, you play a certain time shift. Some days are good, some days are bad, but just you're there quite frequently. And it's good for money, it's good for reliability. Is that going to do anything for your career, big picture? You might be able to meet some people, but you're not going to get discovered. You're not going to build a huge fan base based out of Broadway. It's basically just cover band central. But playing on Broadway is an excellent training ground for just being able to play in a variety of situations with a variety of people, being able to play any song like that, for honing your craft on stage, for figuring out what people respond to, what people don't respond to, for learning how to work in just very different conditions that are so dynamic. And I think it's an important skill to have, and not everybody can cut it down there. And that doesn't mean they're bad or good. It's just like, yeah. Yeah, Brent Mason. Well, Brent Mason is, yeah, that's a different thing. But you can get Brent Mason playing a track for like 250. I don't know if you know that. Brent Mason is a great guitarist, one of the greatest like country guitarists ever. And so Paul asks, how do people make it big? That's a great question, Paul. And let's start by this way. What is making it big? You know, making it big for me is very different than making it big for my friends. And I think it boils down to what's your definition of success? What's your definition of happiness? What gives you fulfillment? Is it financial? And if it's financial, I think, you know, if you worked on Broadway, you could find a way to be making $150,000, $200,000 a year. It'll take some time. But yeah, and then you have a regular job, you're not traveling. And will you be fulfilled artistically? Who knows? For me, that wouldn't be it. And then Paul says, well, having a hit record. So Paul, let's talk about it that way. What's a hit record now? Like, and I'm not being, like, I'm sincerely asking, is a hit record that it's being played on the radio? Is a hit record meaning that it's sold something or it's gotten placed in an advertisement where you can make money off of it? Is hit based off of money, based on popularity, based on influence? Like, really, and this is, all these questions are really like, it's all relative to who's asking and who's answering. Like, what do you want? And how do you define a hit record? And everyone has like different thoughts on that. You know, it's just another way of would you rather be famous or would you rather be influential? And I think a lot of these questions are fairly open-ended and they are relative to the person. And giving one person advice for one thing could be the worst thing for the next person. And, you know, that's also why I started. So this week I have a couple videos coming out where I'm talking about, you know, networking. I'm talking about advice. And I've gotten to a point here in Nashville where I'm playing so much and I'm really having to be selective with my time because I'm having to work a lot more for a lot less. I have a lot of things going on. And I'm also like there's only so much energy I have in the day. And I have so many people asking me to get together, so many people wanting to call, wanting to chat, wanting to get lunch, coffee, which is great. I am honored and humbled by that. And everybody I talk to is my peer. I'm not above anybody else. And I think that way, and I'm like, well, if I'm just this normal dude in Nashville, who are like the big players, the big names who like have like that, like, what if I asked them to go out for coffee or lunch? They would be like, no, I'm busy. I don't have time for that. And I understand that now. And it's not because they don't want to, I mean, I can't speak for them, but like when I can't get back to people, it's not because I don't want to help. It's because I'm playing, like sometimes I'm playing 3 gigs a day. And then I also have to get ready for like going out and doing some weekend runs. And I also have to get ready, I'm working on some other long-term projects to keep myself stable. And there's only so many hours in the day. So one thing I've recommended to people to start doing is like taking lessons from musicians. And it doesn't even have to be lessons on your instrument. You say like, listen, can I pay you for a lesson? I want to sit down and chat with you for a half hour, an hour. And I think that really helps both parties because sometimes if you're like spending hours looking on YouTube for that piece of advice or that one kind of, you're not getting any connections and you're just getting a random piece of advice that may or may not be applicable to you. It's just like people searching on like Google for what they need to do to fix their illness. Well, what worked for one person might be very bad for you, and it's all relative to your situation. So I encourage people like start, if there's somebody you really want to connect with, instead of just saying, hey, do you want to get coffee or lunch? Offer to take a lesson with them. Like, that's one way to do it. Lead with some kind of value. So that way you can make a connection because these people have everyone coming from left and right asking them for things. And if you only have so much time in the day, you have to be really selective about that. But if you're a musician that's developing yourself, think of all the time you spend by getting direct access to someone, making a connection, building a relationship. And then when you're offering somebody like, hey, I'll pay for you for a lesson, it's something that's scheduled. So somebody won't flake out on it. And you don't feel like you owe them a favor. Like, or you don't feel like I'm wasting your time because you're paying for it. I've suggested people do that. Or like, find a way to lead with value. Find a way to say, I can do this for you that is worth something that nobody else can. It's like, oh, hey, I would love to take some shots of you sometime, just free for my portfolio. Let's say you're a photographer. You can like use this for your, social media. And musicians always love promo material. So if you can do something like that for them, that's your ticket in, as opposed to, hey, let's get coffee, let's get lunch. And so I've started doing that. Well, like, I have to be selective with my time now, because some days I'm gone for like 3 or 4 days a week, and then I'm back in town, and I just only have so many hours in the day. So I started offering Zoom lessons. I started doing lessons on Zoom, and a lot of times we can talk about music, we can talk about repertoire, we can talk about playing regardless of your instruments. You can play for me, but a lot of times I would just like, me and these people will chat. And I find that it's really much better for them instead of just like answering these questions in a general way. Because people are like, how do I get so-and-so? And it's all dependent on who you are, what you want, how you approach doing it. So Paul is asking me if I could see stars coming in the bars. Sometimes, but you rarely see it on Broadway. One of my favorite examples is I was at my buddy Keo Stroud. He's drummer, used to play for Big and Rich. He's played for like everybody. He's probably one of the best drummers in town, one of my favorite drummers. Went out to his gig on a Monday night, and Zach Brown stopped by, played a little bit. And then Jamie Johnson played a little bit, and then Riley Green. So yeah, that happens sometimes. Yeah, and Trey's talking about like studying with a pro, and sometimes like you spend that entire lesson picking their brain. And I think that can be really valuable, because I would say most people that I encounter, like, you have to be proficient at your instrument. You have to be able to be good enough to get the job done. But one thing I realized in Nashville that's true everywhere else in the world, that there's always somebody better than you. Always. You have to be prepared for the person giving you coffee, taking out the trash, whatever job. They very well likely could have more skills than you on their instruments. So what sets you apart? Like, you need to have connections. And I would rather pay more for somebody I know and that I know is not going to cause me any problems, that's going to be easy to work with, that I'm going to enjoy working with, than some random person who might be a great player, but I've never met them before, and I don't have the time to suss them out or take a chance with them on a random gig. And so I think a lot of times people they think the reason why they're not getting gigs is because they're not good enough playing. And that could be true for some people. But a lot of times it's just like, oh, they haven't built the relationships in the right ways. So Brad Johnson says, I found that playing music is easy, making money is the hard part. I mean, yeah, you get paid, like, making music, that's the fun part. You don't get paid for that. You get paid for all this stuff in between. Yeah, there's so many things that lead up to that moment of being on stage. And I think it's just like that tip of the iceberg where you see success. Success is that tip of the iceberg, but there's all that struggle underneath, all that hard work. And where I say it's just like building a house, man. I think a lot of musicians, artists, people, they spend a lot of time building the exterior, building the details, like the social media, which is important. But how much time do they spend on that foundation? Like, who am I as a person? What am I building? What do I want? Like, a lot of times I'll ask myself, why am I doing this? Is this making me happy? Is this fulfilling my goals? And I found that I've done this quite a bit, and other people do it quite a bit as well. They're essentially starting to build a house without having a blueprint. And they're just saying, oh, maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll put this here. But if you don't have a blueprint, you're just you're working against yourself. And also, like, what are you going to build your foundation on? Yeah, it's and it's hard to figure out what your blueprint is. Like, sometimes you have to spend, and sometimes you start building, and you're like, you know what, this isn't going to work, but it's okay to start tearing it down. And we have Brad talking with Joel. So Brad is from St. Louis. Brad's my friend. I met him through my buddy Joe Murphy. Joe is somebody I met about a year ago on a gig and never met him before. And he was just doing a couple gigs with Cara Granger and I. And he saw that I had a GoPro and he was really interested in it. So he just hit the ground running with his video stuff. And now a year later, like, he is becoming a video wizard and he is like doing videos for and he didn't even have a freaking video camera last year. He's doing multicam shots for other bands and artists. He's helped me with a lot of different videos. And that's like another thing, like Joe, he's demonstrating value to other musicians as a musician, but also a videographer. And that's a great asset to Joe. And that opens up different opportunities for him. And likewise with me. So now that I'm slowly building a YouTube audience, and it's not big, okay? No bones about it. I'm not getting a big head. But for some people, like, oh, I've seen your YouTube videos, or if you put me on your channel, that will get me more exposure. You have more value to me. And let's say, like, as a drummer, let's say I'm a 7 out of 10, but someone who's like a 10 out of 10, but might be kind of a little bit weird or have nothing to offer in terms of promotion or in terms of carrying the load, what's the artist going to do? And some artists would rather have the 10 out of 10. Some artists would rather have somebody that is like, okay, this person has a lot more to offer me. So I think about that, folks. I'm curious if anybody has any more questions, because I usually like to wrap these up after about 45 minutes. A couple of videos this week, one talking about the coffee, asking people for coffee. One detailing a crazy weekend on the road. I also did an interview yesterday, which I hope should come out in about a week or so, talking about the music business, talking about the business aspect of music as it relates to musicians, as it relates to ordinary people. And I think a lot of people have this music thing down, or they have their identity, but they're just lacking on like the business and the plan and what they're building towards. So we're gonna have something like that coming up. But you know what? So Joel, who's in this chat right now, he messaged me yesterday about some things. He was having some questions about, like, I've been wanting to do this, and I was talking to a musician. And he said this, and I was like, huh. So I slipped some of those questions into the interview as a way to kind of like, okay, I know a lot of musicians have these questions. So if you're a musician and you have a question for me, you want me to ask in an interview or address it somehow, don't be afraid to shoot me a message. I can't always get to them, but sometimes, like, when I'm going through messages, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea, because if you have a question, chances are another musician is going to have the exact same question, right? And again, my mission is to really, really help other people, whether that's giving them insight as to like what my journey is like, and to give them inspiration or confidence that they can do it, or just answer questions that maybe I think are ordinary to me, but other people, they're really curious about. So this channel is really for other people. It's for you, it's not for me. I'm just using myself as a vehicle. And even when I'm talking about personal stuff, I want to do that in a way where this is accessible to other people, where it gives people permission to be like, I don't think I can do this right, or some days they don't feel like they can do it. Because there's some days I don't feel like I can do it. Some days I don't feel like getting out of bed. It's been a couple of days this week I didn't feel like being alive. And I'm simply acknowledging that, like, sometimes life gets tough. And I say this is part of the process. And this is part of, like, I don't want to deny this, but I also want to, like, okay, I need to be regularly working on this and addressing it and working through grief. And what I just said was probably really heavy. That was probably a real load. And you see me, I'm talking in a very thoughtful, collected way. And I think you can be both. You can be seriously, you can be going through tough times and tell people, like, I was telling one person I was working with yesterday, they're like, how you doing? I'm like, man, I'm having one of the worst weeks of my life. And we had a laugh about that. And I said, I just wanted to acknowledge that. that's not going to bring me down, but I'm also not going to act like everything is hunky-dory. It's, it's part of life. And again, this isn't about me, but giving other people permission to feel those things, to express those things, but then also like, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm gonna address it. Maybe I'm gonna sit down for an hour, write out some thoughts about this, talk with somebody about it, and then I'll put that away and then I'll go play my gig. It's a lot easier said than done. It's exhausting, but you can do it. Maybe other people know this, I'm figuring it out now. And I really did not take care of my emotional and mental health when I was younger because I didn't know how to. I wasn't given those tools. We didn't really have those conversations. So if I can have those conversations that may seem like a little bit dicey or uncomfortable, that's okay. I don't mind dipping my toes into those waters. But I also like to do it in a way that is talking about it in a healthy, constructive way without just being dramatic for dramatic's sakes. But yeah, that's about all I have time for. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Thanks so much for your support. Thanks so much for again, I don't view people as fans or viewers. I view people as friends along with me on this journey. So thank you for coming along with me on this journey. You make the trip all the more worthwhile. Be kind to one another. I'll see y'all next week.